welcome back to yet another edition of the Dental Practice Launch podcast, our startup series featuring, you all know him by now, Dr. Dan Dienowitz of Voorhees Pediatric Dentistry. We've been following along with Dr. Dan's journey from the dream to where we're at in today's episode, where we're going to talk about some specifics of construction and finding that right contractor and finding the dental equipment into practice and all of those things that most of us probably have no idea what we're getting ourselves into when we first start. So we're going to dive into that with a special guest that we have here today. But before we do, if you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast. You can also follow us on YouTube. We're on through Crimson Media's YouTube channel. You can find all the episodes there in case you're coming in halfway through some of these. You want to go back and listen to kind of Dan's origin story, because it's really neat how this whole thing is coming together. But before we dive in too deep in today's episode, Dan, how are things going, man? I feel like we're recording these, we're almost getting into a groove where it's like a weekly recording, or, at the very least every other week. So I feel like, I'm right there with you, man, seeing all this come along. So how is it going, and anything new happening since, we last connected?
Yeah, no, I'm loving this. We're doing this like you said, it's in real time. Everything's all good. This week, we finalized design on the feature airplane wall that we spoke about in the last episode. We got the airplane finalized, and the mural is looking gorgeous. And we're just going to set up when they're going to be doing that, which will be after we get our certificate of occupancy once construction is done. And then my airplane buzz in the back of my head is filling in now.
There was a follow-up question that had to be had there.
It's only been like 7 days, but it's already filling in. So I'll just have to do it again closer to opening day. And then construction is moving along, thankfully, pretty rapidly. And we got framing up, electricity and HVAC is in, and next week is a really exciting day. Next week we're going to have a big walkthrough with my contractor, my consultant from Ideal, Brian, is going to be there, and along with some key people on the team, and we're going to be checking everything out. And that's going to be right before it's the pre-drywall inspection before the actual walls go up.
Man, it's legitimately just coming to life. It's the building it, from where we started to where you're at now. And, with the everything that's moved along, I feel like, and I'm knocking on wood here as I'm saying this, I promise, but it seems like from my point of view over here in our communication, things have been going fairly smooth, and that's not always the case when we're talking with startups, and there's permits and different red tape and things you got to go through and hiccups along the way. But correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like so far things have been fairly smooth sailing.
Big knock on wood. Me and Brian, we were talking with my landlord earlier today, talking about the same thing, that they're having, a couple of hiccups along the way naturally happen, but so far so good. And I attribute that to having a great contractor who knows what he's doing. He's dental specific. So he's done this a million times, and having Ideal Practices behind me, guiding the way, all the steps along the way. It's, just systems, right? When I open my practice, you got to have systems in order to be successful. If you don't have systems, you're kind of just going in random directions, and, you might be making circles. So I feel like that's really important. Yeah.
Yeah, having the right team, in your corner, not only for the guidance, but just kind of that, emotional side too, of knowing they're, behind you and there to support you, I think is key. And with the construction and everything that's coming along, and we've now got, as we're recording this, coming soon ads, out on social media, and Dan mentioned it briefly earlier, the buzz cut with the logo. It's just so much is coming together. And as Dan is seeing his space really turn into his vision, Voorhees Pediatric Dentistry, we got to talk about how we got there to that point. How did we get the contractors? What's the process look like when you're trying to find the right contracting group to work with, and filling the practice with equipment? These are all things that we're going to talk about today with our guest from Ideal Practices, Brian Frary. And Brian, thank you so much for joining us here, because this is something that, I'm sure when you come into the picture when working with your startups, this isn't something people necessarily have a lot of experience in doing, right? Unless they've done this before, you don't know what you don't know. So I would love to hear, before we kind of dive into Dan specifically, just a little bit about, what you do and what your role is when helping startup dentists.
Yeah, so I'm a dental startup consultant with Ideal Practices. So my job is to guide the doctors, Dr. Dan, through the equipment, construction, and IT process. So, which is a fun process. Equipment, construction, two really, really big ticket items, right, in the budget. So it's great. We have our initial call when they get handed off to us, when they've found a space and they're ready for introductions. They've got a space plan design done, and we have an initial call. I talk with the doctors. Dan and I had a wonderful call. I'll never forget it. It was just amazing. So really like Dan just off the start. But besides that, we go through, what to expect during construction, the bid process. We go through the equipment process and that bid process, and, getting on rough bid review calls and final calls and things like that to get that number dialed in. So it's a really fun process going through all that stuff, and having the experience in, dental for so many years with construction and equipment. It's just great. I love being here and doing what I do. It's amazing. Yeah.
And I mean, you're literally, in such a unique role, because you're seeing, this whole thing through from what was in their head essentially to becoming reality, and seeing the sculpture, if you will, come to life. And so when you mentioned having that first phone call, what is usually one of the first big steps when you start working with, an office? Is it finding potential contractors to do a bid? What is kind of that first initial process like when it comes to, what you do and what, we did with Dan in this case?
Yeah, so we actually have contractors nationwide that we've worked with in the past. In Dan's case, for instance, he had a contractor out there that he knew of that had done dental. So my job at that point is to say, hey, let me give this contractor a call, see how much dental he's done, because of course dental and medical are completely different. And of course we want to have a dental specific contractor. It makes all the world of difference.
And can you talk a little bit about that, why that's so important to, I'm sorry to cut you off there, but why it's so important for dentists out there listening to find a dental specific contractor?
Well, obviously the experience within dental, right? So there's so many little intricate pieces in the dental office. You've got special air lines, special size vacuum lines that have to be run under a floor, for instance, that have to be, run a special way, and it has to drop a certain point every 10 feet. So, having all the different backings for x-rays and things like this, and dedicated circuits for power for different pieces of dental equipment. So, contractors that don't have experience in that can't price it out properly, right? So it's super important to have that, experience there. So, and again, in Dan's case, I talked to his contractor, Dave, and wonderful conversation, said, hey, how much dental have you done? Here's what Ideal Practices does. Here's our process. And he says, man, this is great. He says, I've done tons of dental. And of course, did some more investigating too on my own with equipment reps locally and real estate people, and gave the thumbs up. And it's been honestly just a wonderful process with Dave. Like, he is really, really good. So I'm glad we found him.
And Dan, talk a little bit too about how you found this contractor, because I'm sure in a lot of cases, like you said there, Brian, you may come with, suggestions of certain contractors, you used around the country. But when a client, comes to you with potential referral that they've heard about, that's interesting. So Dan, I'd love to hear kind of how you found out about this contractor and what kind of stood out to you?
Yeah, so my contractor, Dave, I found out through a friend who's a pediatric dentist in South Jersey. And I was at dinner with him and a couple other pediatric dental colleagues the other night. It's our state association dinner. And I found out actually how far back the quote-unquote family line went of this guy working through dentists. So my friend got it from another pediatric dentist who got it from another pediatric dentist. So there were a lot of pediatric dentists who were very happy with Dave and his group. And so that really just gives you that, comfort to know that people were, so happy with him that they were willing to, keep recommending him. And this guy only goes through word of mouth. He doesn't advertise, which is probably pretty unusual. But that means a lot in itself. So I, learned of this contractor, and I presented the idea to Brian, and Brian really helped a lot because I didn't know really, you don't know the language going into this. You have to give a lot of trust in people, and that's where a great consultant comes in. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's great. I love when doctors will come to us and say, hey, you know what, I've got a friend who's great. Have they done dental? I believe they have. Give me his phone number. Let me give him a ring. And yeah, it's just been great. So yeah, I like doing that because you got to call and vet them. Obviously having that dental specific is just super, super important. Having a family member that knows construction or has done residential doesn't save you money in the end.
And you mentioned something that, I thought was really important too. And you talked about, vetting them out and also, reaching out to different, reps in the area and things too. What is your advice to somebody who is looking at, potential contractors and, do you recommend, reaching out to trying to find others they've worked with or reps, or what is that process like just to, kind of check the sources, so to speak?
Yeah, I would say, checking with colleagues that have done a startup is a big one. I get that a lot. I've got a friend who's a colleague who did an office here and worked with this contractor, and do you know them? And a lot of times they will be on our list of vetted contractors and things like that. So always good to talk, to their colleagues, and then also to the real estate people. The real estate people have a lot of knowledge about really good contractors in the area as well.
And when you are doing this process, then there becomes kind of like the the vision that you're presenting to them, and then my understanding is correct. They put together a bid on what they estimate this to be. Can you walk us through that process? And is there a recommendation of a certain number of bids that you recommend a startup office getting to compare and contrast, and how do you know what is the best option? Because I'm assuming the least expensive option maybe isn't always the best option when it comes to this, but
it isn't.
I would love to hear kind of like what that process looks like.
Yeah, so we will always introduce 3 contractors in the area, right? Gives you a good line there, and gives you, some good ideas of pricing when they come in. Gives the doctors a little bit of time, obviously, to compare who they want to work with, So I always say getting 2 to 3, 2 minimum, 3 top is great. And again, like you mentioned, Shane, the cheapest isn't always the best. So, when the doctors meet with them, they've got their worksheet, they've got their space plan that we do here at Ideal, and they meet with the doctors either in person, via Zoom, coffee shop, wherever, kind of talk about what their vision is, what they're thinking. They may talk about finishes and say some things, minor things as flooring, cabinetry, countertops, things like that. They send out a rough bid. In that rough bid, I'm looking to see, all right, first of all, are they in budget? Why is this contractor $100,000 more than this one? I go through those and say, all right, well, here's what's included on this one. Here's what's excluded on this one, right? And then the client and I, Dan and I, will have that phone call and say, hey, who'd you like? Who'd you not like? Hey, I liked them all. Great. Okay, let's go through all the bids together, line item by line item. Here's what I noticed. Here's my recommendation or suggestion. and they go back to the contractor at that point, and they get the second turn, and then by that point, they pretty much know who they want to work with. So, but yeah, it's the rough bid process is basically making sure that that budget number looks really good, and they have a choice, right?
This was, by the way, this was like, Brian just kind of glazed over it, but like this was hours and hours of phone conversations between Brian and I at night after work, and like I'm so appreciative of his like flexibility, and like he was always very patient with my questions, and with Michelle, my wife, being involved. Like we both really wanted to like grasp like every line item, so it just that was really great. When we finally landed on deciding to select Dave, my contractor, what I really loved about him, the prices came out pretty similar between two contractors. They were within $10,000 of each other. Dave was a no frills guy, no BS, very nice, but he, as it turns out, he was my advocate during the process. He really helped kind of defend me against some hiccups that do come up in the process, and he's looking to save me money, which I don't think you can really say about a lot of contractors overall. He literally tells me like, no, stop spending money there, you don't need that, we're going to use this great material, and like you don't need to use that. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah,
well,
thank
that
you.
Was
and
good.
Go ahead, Shane.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say real quick, and maybe you can mention what you were gonna say there too, Brian. But I can imagine getting a bid back, like unless you had somebody like a Brian, working alongside you, would you just like stare at that? I feel like my eyes would just glaze over, and I'd be like, okay, what am I even like? What am I looking at here? What is the differences? Yes. I guess how was that, Dan, and kind of seeing that, and did you have that moment in your head of like, wow, what if I was like doing this by myself? Yeah. And like what I don't know what was going through your mind when you were trying to figure that out.
Yeah, if I did it by myself, I wouldn't know what I was missing, so I would be kind of like in probably ignorant bliss early on, but then like a year or two into practice, realizing like, oh my god, I should have done that. Oh my god, now I have to tear up the wall and put that in there. There's just so much. Also, Brian touched on this, but when you're looking at the bids and you're comparing them, you think you're comparing it apples to apples, but sometimes this apple has a little extra on it, and sometimes this apple didn't include certain things, and so when prices might be similar, but this one might have what's the word where they're like they're underestimating the actual scope of the work, and then months in, like, oh sorry, another 10,000, another 20,000, another 30,000, and it keeps going up, and you realize that actually wasn't the more affordable option.
Yeah, and that's the thing about construction bids. So we may get a bid back that's super detailed that a doctor can read and understand, but then you're going to get two bids that may not be so detailed. So that's why it's important for us to be on these bid review calls together, so we can go through it and make understanding of everything. Because even I will read some of these sometimes and go, okay, what's going on here? But you do it long enough, you figure it out. But it takes a little while to go through those. That's why those bid review calls are super, super important. Obviously, for the doctor to understand, making sure everything's within budget, like I say, which is a big thing. And the other thing too, like Dan mentioned a minute ago, was, hey, I'm a year in and I've got to tear my wall open because I forgot to add this. The big part of the construction process too is once Dan signs up with Dave does the MEP drawings, which are the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing drawings, which are going to be submitted to the city for approval and all that good stuff. But we have a call and we go through that as well, right? So I'm looking for convenience outlets in the operatory. Do they have the dedicated power in the sterilization? Do they have the air line? Little things like this, data lines, little things like this will create change orders, and that's when the cost starts to go up. So we go through all of that with our clients as well, and went through that with Dan, just educating and all that good stuff. So it's quite a process, construction.
I'd imagine this would be, and Dan, maybe from your perspective, as somebody who's going through this and opening a startup practice, was this one of the more detailed, processes having to go through and really with a fine, comb and really try to wrap your head around it? Because from my perspective, it's like this would be just kind of like a lot, right? To process. Thank goodness for a Brian and people who do this every day. But what was that like when you got to kind of this stage and going through all the nitty gritty details of it all?
Yeah, I mean, it is and it isn't. This is the most expensive part of the process. Over 50% of your bank budget is going to be going to this. So there, it was nerve-wracking, but I was guided. But this is when the decisions also start coming quicker and quicker, and you start that was the moment when I started transforming, I feel like, and I started feeling less like an associate and more like a business owner, because now it was like, all right, we got option A, B, and C. Let's, go through it and then, make a decision and move on. No decision's ever going to be perfect. You do the best with the information you have at hand and you move on, because now you have your lease signed. The clock is ticking. If you're lucky, you negotiated a good amount of free rent and you want to get this contractor chosen sooner than later so that they can start construction, so that you can open up on time and not be paying, very expensive rent when you don't even have a practice open yet.
Right. Yeah. And that's super important too, talking about timing, Dan, right? We talked about that a lot. And, the permitting process, right? That can be agonizing for some.
Yes.
Some areas it's 4 weeks, some areas it's 12 to 16. So, the quicker you get working on that stuff and the quicker that the equipment is chosen to get their MEP drawings done, the dental folks, and get them over to the contractor, the better you are, because the clock is ticking. So,
right. And that is such a huge point there. And that kind of moves into our next side of this, which is the dental equipment and choosing, what's going to be right for your practice. I would, I'm curious to hear, what is that like? And, from the dentist side of things, there's always, I'm sure, a bunch of things you would like to have to start with, but, budgeting and whatnot for a startup, you may have to pick and choose some of those things and hold off on some others until a later date. Walk me through that process and choosing equipment and how you all kind of go about that, and what that kind of timeline looks like.
Yeah. Well, I had so much fun with this step of the process, actually, which I don't think a lot of people say, but when you're looking for the equipment, you get invited to these showrooms, and they're like the Disneyland of dental equipment, which sounds really, really exciting. But no, it was a lot of fun. Michelle and I, we went over to one of the big equipment vendors over in Pennsylvania, and then one in New Jersey, and we got to try out all these different chairs, and they had 20 different mock setups of dental treatment rooms and sterilization centers. And it's just amazing, because when you're used to working in an associateship for so many years with the same equipment, you don't realize what's kind of new and what's out there. And you really see this top of the line beautiful stuff. And these machines are also beautiful furniture in your operatory. So you look at these things now and you can start kind of doing a little interior design too, which many of these equipment companies do. So we enjoyed it. We took a lot of these dental chairs for a ride up and down and spun around and doctor's chairs. And that was the fun part. The less fun part was finding out the price tag.
Yes. Yeah, it's always highly recommended to go visit a showroom, right? So you can see everything, like Dan said. And it's like a kid walking into a candy store. In the showroom he went to up in Pennsylvania, everything's functional. It's just a wonderful experience for doctors to go see that. So I'm always recommending showroom visits. See the different mounting options, see the new chairs, look at the sterilization centers, look at the new handheld x-rays, look at all the new technology, see what you really like and what it looks like in action, right? So that's super important. But then Dan says, hey, the price tag. Dental equipment is expensive. So, building out, say, a 6-7 op practice, the key in the magic number is 3. You want to start with 3 ops of equipment. So you're going to have everything else ready. But hey, listen, here's your budget number, 3 ops of equipment. You got to get mechanical in there. You got to get hand pieces, lab, sterile, and you got to get your digital stuff in there. So it adds up fast. So we work with the doctors on the budget and everything. Dan was really good about that stuff. Sometimes you get lucky enough and the construction number budget comes down, right? It's not as high as, the budget was allotted. So, you got a little extra money there. So, you might be able to move into some equipment stuff and get that technology. So there's ways to make it all happen, without overdoing it in the beginning. You know what I mean?
Yeah. When you mentioned, with like visiting a showroom, I thought that it just in the world that we live in now, everything's so like online centered, but I feel like dental equipment would be almost similar to, and non-dentist, making an analogy here, but like your bed. It's like, I'm not going to buy a bed online. Like I need to try the bed out. Like I need to lay on it, make sure it fits, my body type. Is that kind of what it's like with, do you feel like with dental equipment, Dan? And like, did you have to just see, like, is this something I'm going to, one, visually want my practice, but 2, can I see myself enjoying this or, being functional with this too, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's actually really accurate. When you go to these showrooms, and even if you don't live near one, sometimes they'll fly you out because, it is that big of a purchase. It's worth it. And, the company, just ask, the companies might even fly you out. And you want to not only see the chairs and tinker with the buttons, you want to sit in them. You want to lay back and, in the supine position, and you want to look up at the ceiling and see, how your neck feels, how comfortable your arms are in the armrests, how in this pediatric specific realm, you want to make sure that the chairs will be durable for kids who come in after soccer practice with their cleats kicking dirt all over your beautiful $10,000-$20,000 chair. And then it's also like car shopping. You can find out all the add-ons, all the bells and whistles you can add if you want to.
Sure. Yeah, and like you say, all the bells and whistles. Some of those units are fully loaded with everything, right? Those delivery units, all the good stuff right away. But again, keeping that budget, mindset. What can you do in phases? As you want to add certain pieces of small equipment to your delivery unit and things like that. So that's why it's so important to go to a showroom. And like Dan said, lay the chair back. What's that feel like? Ergonomics is key, right? Can you get behind that chair really good without, banging your knees around on an armrest or a chair brake? And what's your neck feel like moving around? So super, super important to do that. Yeah, you can't just purchase equipment online. You have to go out. You got to touch it, feel it for sure.
Yeah, that's a key point there. And I imagine too, it's just, it's the patient experience, whether it's, kids and teenagers that, like Dan's going to be seeing, or if you're a general dentist, adults, it's part of that patient experience that you're wanting to build too for them. So, I feel like that's such a key element there. And, the other piece of this, of course, is just like the technology in the office. And I know there's so many cool things out there now that you can do with the just digitally, and it's all out there. And I feel like that would be a challenge in the sense of you want maybe some of these really cool toys, right? But at the same time, you're trying to be conscientious of your budget. For you, Dan, specifically, and then Brian, I'd love for you to add on from this too. Were there any things that you really wanted that you were like, this is something I definitely want to make sure I invest in? And then were there other things that you saw were like, yes, I wish I could have them now, but let me wait maybe a few months down the road, a year down the road, whatever the case is, before maybe I make that investment. Did you have to make any of those decisions?
Yeah, there were some things that had to be decided early on. For example, when I was looking at X-rays, traditionally X-rays are mounted on the wall, and kind of the newer thing in the past 10 years is to have handheld X-rays, and they almost look like a plastic gun, and they're mobile, and you can move it from chair to chair to chair. I decided that I wanted to go fully handheld, and that decision was guided by first, the technology is great. They're very high quality, they're low radiation, but also going fully handheld allowed me to free up like 100 square feet in my floor plan, so I didn't have to have a X-ray taking like an intraoral X-ray room. That allowed me to have like pretty much another chair for my hygiene bay. Something I would have liked to have bought right away was a intraoral scanner. Would have been nice to take that for impressions, and I might still get that in the first year, but it was pretty pricey, and there's a perfectly reasonable alternative right off the bat, because scanners are good for space maintainers. They're good for if you bring in an orthodontist, which I'd eventually like to do in my practice. Yeah,
technology is a big ticket item for sure. We get the question all the time, have the conversation all the time. So, what technology do you absolutely need to start with? Obviously, you need a handheld X-ray, right? Like Dan said, key, freedom up some space to get another chair, right? Like, plus you save some money there too. Obviously, with a wall-mounted X-ray, right? Just throwing it out there, you need power and you need backing. You need a push button, so that adds to construction costs, right? So, starting with a handheld obviously freed him up, and that was amazing to get another op there and another chair. So, big ticket items are 2D panos, 3D CBCT, right? Scanners, 3D printers, mills. Okay, what do you need now? What's the budget look like? Doctors do have the option to finance, through one of the dental dealers if they wanted to. There's a pathway for that that we, talk with them about. If it's something that they have to start with, and see what that all looks like. So there's ways to do it, but again, in phases as your practice grows. Start out conservatively, and before you know it, you're going to be adding equipment and getting those pieces of technology that you wanted. So
yeah, I can imagine it's just a lot of don't put any extra stressors on yourself if you don't have to, and going too heavy on too much of the bells and whistles, some of the technology there, when it sounds like, hey, let's build our way up, let's get some revenue in, and then we can always invest in that down the road. Because I'm sure you've seen it before, maybe on your end, Brian, or heard stories from people of, like, man, I really stretched myself a little too thin, when choosing that route. I've heard it from, people too, and I feel like that's a key thing there, is save room in your budget to, get what you need now.
Get what you need now, yeah, because, a lot of doctors, again, going back and saying, 6-7 up practice on average. I've seen doctors out there starting up six rooms of equipment. Well, you got 3 that are going to be sitting, for a while, and they're very frustrated about it. So, again, yeah, start out with what you need. How's the budget? And you'll be adding before you know it. So, absolutely.
That's a great lesson there for everybody listening who's considering doing a startup, for sure. Build out for 3 to start, and you have the rest ready to go when the patient volume's there, and you get that built up. The final piece of this is on kind of like the IT, and getting that side of things all squared away. And again, I would assume, is it somewhat similar to finding like a contractor as far as construction? Do you contact different IT companies? Do you have certain people, even Brian, that you've worked with, in the past, that, and should they be dental specific? I would love to hear a little bit about that from your side, Brian, and what you've seen and what you recommend for, our listeners out there.
Yeah. So, of course, we have our list of, dental IT companies that we work with. We have, our go-tos in, different areas. We have a couple of national companies that we work with that do a really, really good job, dental specific. I'm always open to, talking to local folks, in the area that, may not be real big companies, but they're dental specific, right? So always important to have that. They understand the dental, layout, platform, and all that stuff, understand how the dental software works. They understand imaging software. They've worked with cone beams, CBCT, and 2Ds before, so they understand how everything is, supposed to work properly and install properly and all that good stuff. So it's always, recommended to work with dental IT specific for sure. Again, the process will go a lot smoother. I still get the question, hey, you know what? A buddy of mine works for whoever and he does their IT. He could totally do this. Not recommended. You're going to end up spending more time, and more money going through this process. So.
Dan, when you were looking at IT options, what was that process like from your side of things? And were you relying, heavily maybe on, Brian and their team to kind of bring you some options there? Or was it a similar situation like where you knew a contractor from a referral? Did you have the same type of situation with the IT company? I'm curious to hear about how you all kind of went through that process.
Yeah, Ideal had some great recommendations. In this very instance as well, it turned out that this was also a word of mouth referral, the IT group that I went with, and I found with working with some of these word of mouth people that they get referred on and on and on because they are so honest, and that showed instantly in the bid. The quote that this team gave me. This is a father and son team. They work in New Jersey, and the quote in IT is everything from installation of wires to the computers that you're going to be buying. He advised me on the practice management software that he thinks works for a lot of doctors because he works with so many dentists. He also helped advise me on putting TVs in the ceilings and things like that. So that made things pretty easy when I got the quote, and I knew I wanted to work with them.
Yeah, they really worked well. And again, this is another one that Dan, again, like you said, word of mouth. Hey, would you call them? Of course I'll call them. And of course, Carrie and I hit it off right away, and come to find out, their history and all that. So they really, really worked well with Dan, and they did a good job with him. Yeah. The only problem with Carrie is that I often talk to him on the phone for about 30 minutes about IT stuff, and then another 30 minutes about our favorite restaurants, favorite places to get pizza and bagels and lox. Yeah. And so that's he likes to conversate.
And then I hope he watches this and laughs.
Yeah, I'm sure he will. I think he's got a good sense of humor. Yeah, he definitely likes to chat and talk, so which is great. But yes, yeah, you call Carrie and be on the phone for a little bit, but it's all good. And again, Shane, and going back to the IT and introducing, right, like with contractors and equipment reps, you want to give them choice. So again, it's the same process. We look at the proposals together. We go through everything. How's the budget look? Do you really need a sound system right now? Maybe not. Maybe it's, better to just wire it. Do you really need surveillance cameras? What's that cost look like? Is this something you can add? Do you want to do the wiring now? So little things like that to keep them in budget. And then most importantly too, what's the monthly look like? And what does it cover? So is it remote access? Et cetera.
That was actually going to lead right into my next question. What are some, if I'm a startup dentist and I'm starting to research into, some IT companies, are there some key questions there that I should be asking IT companies that I'm looking into, such as, can I remote access, so on? Are there a few of those questions that you kind of recommend?
Yeah, sure. Obviously the first thing is, how much dental have you done, right? I always say to ask, how long you've been around. And yeah, what do you charge monthly? What does your service plan, consist of? A lot of them want to talk about, server versus cloud-based, So definitely a good question to ask, right? Some IT companies have different philosophies on that, but I always say talk to them about that, get their take and see what their thoughts are. So I'd probably say those are the most important things to ask them.
Yeah, I wanted to really go cloud-based, but as it turned out, the software that is very popular amongst dentists, its best version is still server-based. So we kind of priced it out and spoke to the practice software company themselves as well, and we're trying to figure out when their cloud software is going to be kind of up and running. So I went ahead and purchased a server, which it's not cheap, but not not going to break the bank. And eventually we'll convert, move over to cloud probably in about 5 years when things are up and better.
Yeah, it's like the cloud-based. I hear a lot about it. With some variety of practice management systems and things too. And it's still one of those things that it's awesome. I think it's cool, and the capabilities of it are amazing. But it's early still, and with integrations and things of that nature, I feel. So, but that's good because you're thinking about, all right, here maybe what is best today, but also I thought it was important, Dan, how you talked about their cloud capabilities in the future, because that's the direction you want to head, a few years down the road. And so I think that's something that people should be thinking about as well, rather than just the today. Look at the today, but also, what does a few years down the road look like too?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you kind of got to future-proof it, definitely.
Yeah, this has been fascinating. And one other thing, that I was going to ask about specifically on the IT side is how important is it when interviewing and finding that right fit, not only about what their opinions are on server versus cloud based, and what their maybe retainer covers and all of that, but then the part about the customer support, because when your IT you're having issues there, it's pretty much shutting the place down in many ways, right? And so how important is that? And Brian, is that part of what you do? And kind of, I'm sure that the companies you work with certainly, have that reputation of great customer service, so you kind of know. But for those out there who are listening to this, and this is kind of all new to them, and maybe they don't have 2 or 3 companies that they're thinking about, would you recommend finding other people who've used those companies, looking up reviews? I'm curious to hear what you suggest for those individuals.
Yeah, I mean, again, who's your colleague using, right? What's your experience like? And again, that's a conversation I have with lots of doctors. I've got Dr. So-and-so, a colleague of mine working with this IT company. They've had, a great experience, or they haven't had a great experience. Okay, well, there are other, IT companies in the area. Give them a ring, right? I'll talk to them. Again, going back to like what you said, Shane, most importantly is, I always say is, monthly cost, right? So, I do see some IT companies charge really, a lot of money for a monthly, right? It may be broken down to each computer costs this much. Here's how much we charge to come out, a travel charge. Here's how much we charge an hour. A lot of the stuff now can be fixed and repaired remotely, which is great. So again, remote access is a huge one. Most of them offer anyways. But, looking at that service plan is, huge backups and things like that. So I would recommend definitely, dentists go with, a dental specific IT company for sure. There's a lot of good ones out there too. There's a lot of good ones.
I think that's really kind of the theme, here tonight as we've talked is, when you are investing, this type of, capital and resources into your startup, find companies and partners who worked in dentistry, who have that experience. Sure. Yeah. It's going to, even if maybe you pay a little bit of a premium for it, ultimately you're paying for that experience and potentially avoiding future headaches and spending more money later down the road. I think it's better to be safe than sorry, and I think that's a big lesson that I've kind of taken away from this today. And this has just been fascinating for me because these are all elements of starting a practice that are absolutely critical, but yet can be intimidating for the person who has not done that before. And Brian, I just can't thank you enough for what you've shared, the input you've given here to our audience, because I know that they're going to be able to take a lot of this away and have something to really think about. And of course, Brian with Ideal Practices and their group works specifically with startups. And so if you're considering a startup, definitely would suggest reaching out to them as well. But no, thank you for being on. And Dan, before we kind of wrap up here,
thank you.
What's kind of next? What's next on the plate? And what are you looking most forward to here over the next, couple of weeks or so?
What's going on? Well, tomorrow, marketing wise, having a big conversation with Stacy from Ideal about what our A5G is going to be. I already know what my A is. That's the agency that I'm working with. It's Crimson. Then the 5 is the 5 tactics as part of a bigger strategy for marketing to getting new patients. So we're gonna definitely dig deep into that, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about that again.
Yeah,
it's good
for
stuff.
Sure. We gotta bring Stacy on to go through kind of after you all have had that meeting, what that was like and kind of the steps you went through to get there. We briefly touched on it, a little bit on episode 2 of this series. For those of you who followed, if you haven't, go back and check that out. But I think once you kind of start to finalize some of those details there, that'll be fun to walk through as well. But cool, man. Well, this has been it's a lot of fun. We'll do it again here soon. Again, Brian, thank you so much for being a guest and sharing your inputs and insights. And of course, in the show note details down below, everybody, we'll have a link to, if you want to follow along, on Dan on social media. We've got his Instagram and social media handled there. Go check it out. Great social media follow. Ideal Practices information down below too, if you're interested in taking that journey and opening up your dental startup. They're a great resource to reach out to. And of course, if you're looking for the marketing side of things, branding, website, logos, to create and make that startup come to life, be sure to reach out to us at Crimson Media. But with that being said, we'll see you on the next episode.